Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot with Penny Bradley. I do have a guest scheduled for today, and he hasn't quite made it yet, so he may show up later. So in the meantime, I'm going to be talking about, okay, y'all know that I've been reintegrating altars. And altars are basically scars from trauma as a child. And I've managed to, at this point, reintegrate 32 of them. And the most recent one I had filled in a lot of really strange storylines. And I thought y'all might be interested. I've been exploring the memories so that I have almost a coherent thread as to what's happening and why it's happening and who else is involved. So this is reintegrated altar number 32. And she was a Valkyrie in Nacht Waffen. The group, the Federation of Free German States or Worlds, was trying to create colonies on bare rock planets. No running water. They had to use caverns to live in, and they were establishing this from literally below ground level and working up. And the folks in their already established colonies were pretty much too civilized, too dependent on technology to be able to do this. So we had a ship. It was named the Valhalla. There were a team of women who were, well, we were fighter pilots out in space, but when it came to our mission, we were taught historical languages from 1,000 years ago in Northern Europe. Now, you think that language stays stable. If you spoke German, you've always spoken German. And that, you can travel 50 miles and you're still speaking the same language. Well, in Northern Europe 1,000 years ago, this was not true. These languages would change dramatically from village to village. And we had to be able to talk to these people because we were looking for below ground working up colonists who were not dependent on modern plumbing, modern electricity, modern technologies. Now, these people do have technologies. They're just not what we're used to. And so we would travel back in time to places where the Black Plague had hit, to places where there were battles. Sometimes we would just sort of cruise the area and watch the battle go down. And when they were done fighting for the day, we women would go down to the battle scene. And this is where it gets gory. We would literally use a laser sword and cut off the heads of the men who had died in battle or were dying in battle, because the technology at the time was if they had a gut wound and they were unable to get up and move around, they were going to die. We brought those heads back to the ship, and we put them through regen. And then we had to teach them to speak Schwabisch, which is the language that we use in Nacht Waffen. It's a dialect of High German. And so you're taking people from 1,000 years ago who may be a German tribe, they may be a Norse tribe, they may be Saxons, they may be Britons. Those are the earliest recorded people we have in England, are the Britons. All of these languages at that time were very, very different from what they are now. Now, one of the things that they had in common were legends of the Valkyrie, the Valkyries. Some groups called them the Morrigans. But they were a group of women who would come in at battles and decide who was going to live and who was going to die and kill people. And in the Norse traditions, the Valkyrie took the heads and took them to Valhalla, the courts of Odin, and held up the head, and the body would reform from beneath it. Well, we thought we were copying the myth. So we were wearing black smart suits. In a smart suit, you are protected from the elements. If you're hit with a spear, it usually will bounce off. You're protected from lasers and energy weapons, and you don't have to eat or drink while you're in it. So we had a black basic bodysuit that took care of our needs. And over that, we had gold armor, because the legend said that the Valkyrie wore gold armor. And some of the legends talk about coming through the atmosphere with flying horses, reminiscent of Pegasus. Now, we did have ships, small ones, shuttles, that we would paint a Pegasus on the side. So we were doing our best to mimic the mythology. And we started off with, in time, with the 30 Years' War. And as we had more colonies that needed basic technologies, we went further and further back into time, which meant we, the people working with these rescued individuals, had to learn their language further back in time. So we ended up with folks who barely understood each other and didn't understand us at all. And so we were teaching them Schwabisch once we had them regenerated. And the hard part was finding the women to go with them, because the women were not usually in the battles. And we didn't really want to get women who died in childbirth, because dying in childbirth is already a big deal. So women dying in childbirth is still a problem out in space. And so we didn't want to continue that genetic heritage. And so we were looking for women who had died from plagues or died from other things. And we were bringing them back as well. And our ship's captain was not named Odin, but he played that role dealing with these folks. And we brought them up to a level where they could understand us. They understood they were in a ship, and they understood what was to be expected of them. And they were the first line colonists on probably 20 worlds. Worlds that have, because we were time traveling, those worlds are established colonies that are 400 or more years old, as far as the time they are right now. And that's one of the big stories about the SSP, is when we figured out that hyperspace drive was time travel, it opened up entire worlds of possibilities. We were no longer stuck with the numbers of people that had been rescued to Antarctica, and then the folks like me who had been abducted as children. We were no longer limited to that. We could go back through the entirety of human history on the planet. And genetic diversity was no longer a problem. Okay, genetic diversity is a big fancy word for making sure you're not inbred. A lot of the European royals have had a serious problem with inbreeding. And if you want to see inbreeding at its worst, look at the Habsburg dynasty of Hungary, Austria. By the time that they finished out, those individuals who were crowned heads in Europe were unable to speak, they were unable to eat, they dribbled, could not talk, could not function. They had the mental abilities of not even a 2-year-old. And their lower jaw was so much bigger than the rest of their face that they could not eat. They had to have liquid food dribbled into their mouths. That's what inbreeding does. So, wanting to keep their people from being inbred was a serious concern. And that was one of the things why that the Germans had asked for Americans to be sent to them, was they were hoping that we could become part of their colonies and expand their genetic diversity. But the agencies in the United States decided to modify our DNA where we were no longer pure Terran, and this made us unsuitable for the Germans. Now, they had a lot of fancy sounding excuses for this, but it came down to they were spoiling the plot on purpose. So,